Before I tell you some of the perks of living in Missouri, let me just address some of the common misconceptions about how terrible certain things are in Missouri. So number one, when I tell friends about Missouri, they say, oh, but the humidity is terrible. I personally love it. It doesn't bother me at all. It feels very healthy. The humidity does make it feel colder during the winter, but the winters here are in general fairly mild. Another thing that I've heard a lot of people say is, aren't there just tons of bugs everywhere? Honestly, it hasn't been a problem for us at all. I think our home has less bugs than the home that we were living in Utah. Chiggers can be an issue. It just depends where you're at. I have not had any major issues with chiggers. We have a few acres of land where we'll walk through, and I have gotten a few chigger bites here or there, but it hasn't really been a big problem. I also haven't had a lot of mosquito bites, but that also just depends where you're at. I have heard a couple horror stories of people who got bit by a bunch of chiggers when they walked through really long grass. But in general, in Missouri, you know, if you keep your grass mowed, usually chiggers aren't a very big problem. The cost of housing is quite a bit cheaper out here. So for example, a couple years ago, we bought a nice big house for less than $150,000. It was in the town, wasn't a huge lot. The housing prices have went up quite dramatically in the last couple of years in Missouri as well. But still, you can find homes for under $200K that could work for your family. And definitely you could find a lot of nicer homes for under $300K or under $400K. When we moved to Missouri, we bought two properties. We first bought one house, but then we bought a second house that was a smaller house that was a fixer-upper, but it had, you know, an acre of land. And we bought it for about $40,000. And then I spent about $20,000 renovating it. And we purchased 2 additional acres for about $13,000 or $14,000. So one of the biggest perks to living in Missouri is that there's lots of land. I mean, just look at, there's just land all over the place. If you really want to buy an acre or 5 acres or 10 acres, you probably could in Missouri. Another thing I love about where we live in central Missouri is that we have Como Connect Internet. They're an internet provider that is just as fast as Google Fiber. And so we have access to really fast internet, even though we live out kind of in farmland USA. And I just love that. I love that we get to enjoy the benefits of having good internet, but also get to live in a rural place of the United States where it's kind of low key, there's not a lot of busyness, not a lot of noise. Another reason you might like Missouri is that the traffic here is super manageable. I don't mind driving in Missouri because you've got 1, maybe 2 lanes going in both directions. There's just not a lot of traffic unless you're right by, you know, Kansas City or St. Louis or a big college town. You usually don't have a ton of traffic. With driving, really all you have to worry about is, you know, driving at night, maybe hitting a deer, or if you get caught in a rain or a snowstorm, if you don't plan ahead for those things. I feel like driving and traffic is just so much more low stress here. It's actually kind of therapeutic because of how calm it is. The nature is just very relaxing. We don't have the issue of smog here. Wildfires do happen in Missouri. Like I almost had one happen at my property because I had a burn pile get out of control, but typically they're not things you see on the news. It's very rare. Another thing I really like about Missouri is that it's very green. There's trees, and if there's not trees, there's, you know, kind of farmland, pasture land. You can go out and you can feel like you have privacy. There's a lot of wildlife. I'm not into hunting, but I know a lot of people in Missouri are really into hunting. There's tons of deer all over the place, and armadillos and squirrels and birds, some really big birds. So it's just a very, very beautiful nature-filled place. It's also a great place to grow an orchard or a garden. There's just so much natural moisture. I don't think I've met a single person in Missouri who waters their lawn. The ground's really soft. It's easier to work with and till and have a really nice garden. In fact, we had like a 4,000 square foot garden last year, and it produced buckets and buckets and buckets worth of food. Another thing I love about Missouri is that there's a lot of Mennonites out here in this part of central Missouri. There's also some Amish people out here as well. And I just think they add a lot of value to the culture of the area. There's a lot of conservative Christians out here. Missouri winters, in my opinion, are pretty awesome because it does get cold. You usually seem to get 2 or 3 winter storms a year that are, you know, where you'll get a few inches or more, maybe up to a foot or so. And so you get enough snow that you could probably go sledding at least once or twice a year with your family. But by the same token, that snow does not usually stick on the ground for longer than a week or two, because usually the way Missouri winters are, usually you have breaks where you'll have a few days where it gets up to the 50s, 60s, 70s and melts all the snow. And I like that because you don't have to worry about shoveling as much or driving in snow all winter long, but you do get to enjoy doing some snow sports. That said, if you're into skiing or snowboarding, you have to travel quite a bit in order to find any sizable mountain or hill out here. There's not a lot of hills or mountains. Another thing you'd probably really like about Missouri is that there aren't many restrictions. It just feels like a place where, where you're kind of free to do what you want. A lot of the towns out here in central Missouri are small towns. It doesn't feel super intimidating to go to the city hall or city buildings and work out whatever you need to work out. In a lot of places in the rural county, you often don't even need to get special permits to do things on your property. You can often just go ahead and do it, and there's really not a lot of restrictions. So I really like that. There's a lot of freedom-loving, independent, self-sufficient people out here in Missouri. The property taxes and taxes in general, I feel like are pretty good in Missouri. For example, at our main house that's bigger with a smaller lot, I think we pay a little bit less than $100 a month for property taxes. And then at our smaller house with more land, I think we pay more like $750 to $800 a year on property taxes. Another benefit to Missouri is that they have pretty favorable and flexible homeschool laws. So if you're into homeschooling, there's a lot of leeway. I think there might be a couple small, keeping track requirements, but I don't think there's active reporting requirements. It's pretty flexible to allow you to kind of do what you want to do. If you work from home, living in Missouri can be a really good fit for you because you can keep your cost of living down, but make the same amount of money you might make elsewhere if you're working online. You can live out in a rural place and kind of have your own property, have a sense of privacy, have place for your kids to roam and play and garden and farm. Also, another thing I've noticed about Missouri is it has good retention. I've talked with so many people in my neighborhood who have lived in Missouri their entire life, who have lived in our town in Missouri for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And that's the common thing. The small towns, at least where I live, seem to have good retention. And I think that speaks to some of the benefits of living in Missouri. Thank you so much for watching. If this video was helpful, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.